I've had a bad history with my parents. I did bodily harm to her the same way I did to him. I tried to do an act of generosity.
A volatile domestic history culminated in him inflicting the same violence upon his mother as his father, a twisted mercy. Secluded in a basement, Ryan TR harbored the delusion that he could liquidate his family and evade all consequences. While Renee and David TR endured their final desperate moments, Ryan was occupied by a jarringly mundane distraction. Following the slaughter, he sought refuge in Grand Theft Auto V, a detail illustrating his profound psychological depravity. The interrogation footage peels back the layers of his fractured mind, revealing a disturbing descent into madness. His volatility was sparked by trivialities, such as a simple intrusion while he was playing Skywars. He claimed that her sudden appearance triggered a wave of panic, leaving him paralyzed before he finally acted. He eventually crafted a narrative of self-preservation, asserting he was merely defending himself against parents who had lost their sanity. He maintained a chillingly calm demeanor while asserting a fundamental distaste for the very violence he had just unleashed. On December 10, 2020, authorities in Massachusetts were dispatched to a residence for a routine welfare check. David and Renee TR, diligent professionals in their 50s, had uncharacteristically failed to report for their morning shifts. Responding officers met only silence. Despite the couple's vehicle sitting in the driveway, no one answered the call. Just as the police prepared to force their way into the residence, they received a harrowing phone call from the couple's other son in Texas, whose words signaled a grim reality. The son noted the presence of the vehicles, his voice heavy with an intuitive dread regarding the scene inside. He urged the officers to breach the entrance immediately, fearing the absolute worst for his parents. The grim suspicion weighing on him was that his parents were no longer among the living. He revealed that his brother suffered from significant psychological struggles and might have finally reached a breaking point. This testimony provided the police with an immediate suspect, shifting the welfare check into a criminal investigation. 21-year-old Ryan TR, the basement resident, became the focal point of a tragedy that had already unfolded. Upon entering, the officers were met with the gruesome confirmation of the brothers' most haunting fears. The victims had been brutally slain and moved to separate areas, their remains hidden beneath blankets. Ryan had vanished, but digital footprints soon led investigators to his vehicle on a secluded fire road. Authorities apprehended him shortly thereafter, eager to hear his version of the night's horrific events. What followed was a masterclass in fabrication, as Ryan began spinning a web of lies during a disturbing interview. The detectives quickly realized they were dealing with a subject whose mental state defied conventional logic. The conversation began with mundane details regarding his graduation from Plymouth High School. The investigators decided to relocate the interview to a more controlled environment for further questioning. They requested he don a face covering, citing the standard health protocols of the time. He complied without hesitation. His broken eyewear sat nearby, a small detail amidst the larger chaos of the investigation. The officers inquired if the prescription lenses were essential for him to function during the questioning. He responded with an eerie nonchalance, suggesting the matter could be handled whenever convenient. They pressed him on whether his vision was impaired enough to prevent him from reviewing legal documents. He assured them his sight remained functional despite the damage to his frames. The police offered to have another officer attempt a temporary repair on the broken glasses. They suggested continuing the dialogue while the repairs were being handled by the staff. Ryan was led away as the detectives initiated the formal legal process and read his rights. The goal was to reconstruct the timeline of the previous 24 hours with precision. They inquired if any conflict had erupted between him and his parents during the preceding night. He immediately claimed to be the victim of a physical assault initiated by his family. He insisted that there had been a deliberate, physical effort to inflict pain upon him. He described an explosion of rage, claiming he was violently shoved and tossed across the room. The investigators sought to identify the specific individual responsible for the alleged aggression. He pointed the finger directly at his father, casting himself as the victim in the tragedy. The investigator confirms the father's name is David. The detective establishes the exact timeline of the incident. The violence occurred around 5 p.m. the previous day. Police probed the nature of the struggle between them. The confrontation was reportedly both verbal and physical. Investigators search for the catalyst behind the assault. He blames the quarantine for his parents' mental decline. In his narrative, they had completely lost touch. He claims they projected their internal stress onto him. The son portrays himself as their perpetual scapegoat. The detective asks for specifics regarding the pandemic's impact. He is pushed to define his parents' alleged instability. The interviewer circles back to the family's breaking point. The parents were reportedly suffocating within their own home. The investigator processes the suspect's claims of domestic misery. He alleges they manufactured conflicts to vent their frustrations. The room remains tense as the interrogation continues. He claims the 5 p.m. attack followed years of abuse. Police check for evidence of prior physical trauma. The focus shifts to the injuries from last night. A fresh wound on the suspect's hand is noted. The detective asks for the cause of that injury. He insists he was only trying to survive. Fearing for his safety, he chose to strike first. He frames the double stabbing as an act of protection. The investigator records the suspect's version of events. He maintains he never wanted the situation to escalate. Instead of fleeing, he decided to stab both parents. To the investigator, his story contradicts the brutal facts. He is asked to recount the attack step by step. He alleges David was intoxicated and inherently aggressive. David supposedly lost control, forcing the son to respond. The assault began with screams and physical intimidation. The detective connects the hand injury to the father. He questions how the father supposedly caused the cut. He admits to carrying a concealed 4-inch pocket knife. The investigator confirms the suspect's own blade bit him. He sticks to the claim of pure self-defense. The detective prepares to document the weapon's specifics. The knife featured a blade approximately 4 inches long. He gestures to indicate the weapon's total length. A macabre orange skull was engraved on the handle. The grip was constructed of cheap orange plastic. The detective focuses on the distinctive skull markings. Observations shift to whether the suspect is right-handed. He confirms being right-handed before the investigator notes the location of the wound. The detective asks if the knife was in his grip when the injury occurred. He claims a defensive maneuver went wrong, causing the blade to slice his left hand. The investigator asks him to recount the verbal dispute that took place with his father. The encounter began with words but rapidly transformed into a physical confrontation. He is asked to describe the specific physical threats that forced him to defend himself. He feared his father was about to shove him or slam him against the wall. The inquiry turns to whether this was an isolated incident or a recurring pattern. He suggests they had reached that breaking point before, despite no prior physical harm. There was no history of battery, only a long series of psychological threats. He alleges his parents subjected him to nearly every form of mental mistreatment. The detective asks him to specify the nature of these alleged abuses. He characterizes their behavior as persistent bullying. He felt they were constantly monitoring his digital life, including his phone and gaming habits. He describes them as surreptitious, watching him closely without any legitimate reason or provocation. He maintains that his actions were entirely innocent. The investigator asks if he was accused of any illicit digital activity that day. He recalls the previous day when they accused him of seeking out trouble online. They suspected him of using his devices to engage in some form of misconduct. The focus shifts to his PlayStation and the specific games he was playing. He confirms playing on a console, prompting the investigator to probe the specific titles. The detective questions how a Star Wars game could be perceived as seeking trouble. He admits to hiding the screen, claiming his media choices were a private matter. The investigator asks if he was simply trying to hide a session of Star Wars. He denies that there was any other content visible on the screen at that moment. Investigators found no evidence of exactly what Ryan was viewing when his father entered. Even a simple video game might have been a psychological trigger for his parents. Their frustration likely stemmed from his lack of ambition rather than the game itself. At the time, Ryan was jobless, living in a basement, and frequenting online forums. The investigator asks if he killed the power to hide something or to exclude them. He claims he was just trying to maintain his privacy and mind his business. The act of hiding the display became the flashpoint for the subsequent escalation. To prevent them from seeing the screen, he simply hit the power button. The television went dark, marking a sharp turn in the confrontation. They took his silence as an insult, further fueling the tension in the room. The investigator asks what transpired in the moments following the shutdown. The situation intensified immediately after the screen went black. He claims they began fixating on non-existent problems to justify their anger. He felt as though he was being targeted in a calculated manner. The investigator listens as the narrative of the confrontation unfolds. He confirms that the verbal sparring began the moment the power was cut. He was seated in his chair, confined within the 4 walls of his bedroom. The detective clarifies the exact location of the dispute within the house. The room was located on the 1st floor of the residence. The investigator asks who else was present as the situation turned violent. The suspect confirmed the presence of himself and his father, David. The detective pressed for the next sequence of events. Ryan was urged to recount the escalation into physical violence. He claimed the assault began after relentless targeted harassment. The interviewer noted the perceived intrusion into his life. Acknowledged. He clarified that he was alone with David during this phase. The suspect began to raise his voice in a struggle. He justified his shouting as a desperate act of self-defense. He maintained his actions were entirely without malice. The official paused to examine the details. He alleged that David cornered him and initiated a physical confrontation. The interrogator sought the specifics of the physical harm inflicted. Ryan described being seized forcefully by both upper limbs. He feared the aggression would move toward his throat. The detective asked if the father was restraining or pinning him. Correct. The interviewer sought to identify who initiated the physical struggle. He insisted the violence began when his father reached out. The official noted the suspect's uncertainty about David's next move. They questioned his immediate response to the physical contact. After being grabbed, he claimed he retaliated with lethal force. The investigator asked for the specifics of his defensive maneuver. Fearing for his life, he admitted to using a weapon. He identified the weapon as a switchblade from his bedroom. The knife had been on the nightstand since the previous day. He grabbed the blade, claiming a reluctance toward violent acts. The detective asked how he managed to end David's life. He admitted to striking the victim with maximum frequency. He stated his intent was to finish the act quickly. Understood. They confirmed the identity of the deceased as David. The inquiry focused on the location of the fatal wounds. He demonstrated the specific way he gripped the switchblade. Investigators noted a glaring contradiction in the account. Despite claims of a beating, his body showed no trauma. The only injuries were cuts on his hand from the blade slipping. Consequently, the interrogation shifted to the mother's location during the killing. 1 hour later, she arrived to find the bloody scene. Panic seized him as he considered her potential reaction. He alleged a fear that she would also attack him. He claimed both parents had previously coordinated physical assaults. He anticipated a threat from her that had not manifested. The tragedy escalated further the moment she entered the room. He stepped back into the scene where his father lay, just as Renee entered the house. Understood. 60 minutes after he took his father's life. Understood. Her sudden appearance triggered a paralyzing panic. He felt utterly cornered. He anticipated a violent reaction from her, mirroring the confrontation with David. Driven by a desperate need for self-preservation, he feared any threat to his safety. He chose to eliminate her too, though he paused to clarify the timeline. Proceed. During the initial fatal struggle with David, where was the mother positioned? She was absent from the house, tending to the backyard during that first attack. So, she was merely occupied with routine yard work at the time? That's right. Which entrance did she use to return? The rear door. Not the door by the driveway, but the one at the back. Correct. Upon her entry, he claimed he acted defensively, ending her life too. I see. He feared she might retaliate, but what was actually said in that moment? What verbal exchange occurred when she stepped inside? There were no verbal arguments, only a chilling silence. The situation escalated instantly due to the psychological pressure he felt. He was terrified of the consequences if she discovered the remains of his father. Noted. His anxiety spiked as she retreated upstairs, allegedly reaching for a firearm. Within a closet, he suspected firearms were kept in that specific space. Which closet are we talking about? The one in the master bedroom? So the parents' bedroom was on the second floor. Yes. What specifically caused her to flee toward the stairs upon entering? The moment she crossed the threshold, fearing discovery, he intercepted her. How exactly was the assault carried out? He inflicted the same fatal trauma on her as he had on David. This began on the ground floor. The violence spanned the distance from the first floor to the upper landing. You used the same blade on Renee as you did on David. He maintained both lives were taken purely to ensure his own survival. Before the tragedy, several witnesses noted the couple's concern over Ryan's volatile behavior. He had recently abandoned the medication used to stabilize his internal psychological state. A day prior, Renee confided in a colleague about her son's spiraling aggression. That 60-minute talk revealed her exhaustion, a sentiment shared by Ryan's brother, Doug. Both parents had described Ryan as becoming dangerously confrontational and impossible to predict. A state of intense agitation preceded the initial lethal encounter with the father. Afterward, he employed those same lethal methods against his mother, claiming self-protection. She attempted to flee, and he pursued her to the second floor. Exactly. A heavy silence hangs. He sought solitude. Seclusion was his goal. He blamed their noise. They were his targets. A dark buzz. They discussed the murder weapon. An orange skull pattern blade. 4 inches of steel. He struck her identically. The wounds were consistent. He attacked her fleeing. He rearranged the scene. Bodies were moved. He played video games. A night of gaming. Grand Theft Auto. Distractions followed. Online virtual charity. Distributing fake cash. Hollow digital benevolence. He claimed generosity. A recurring habit. He enjoyed virtual assistance. Self-defense narrative failed. Evidence showed a chase. It was an execution. The evening of Wednesday, between 5 and 7, 24 hours ago, his glasses were shattered, searching for a lens. A 3-hour obsession. Damage during the struggle. Focusing on repair. He planned his flight. He fled eventually. He packed basic rations. Water was gathered. He considered hiding. Indecision set in. He never slept. Exhaustion was evident. Rest was impossible. He left at dawn. He exited the residence between 6 and 7 a.m. Understood. They questioned the hoarding of supplies, the rations and bedding mentioned earlier. Everything was stashed inside his vehicle. He collected them. He prepared the vehicle before fleeing. Detectives asked when he packed it. That morning, focus shifted to the weapon, a distinct blade featuring a bright orange skull. He kept it on him. And, claiming peaceful intentions, he insisted it was merely being carried, never intended for violence. That remained true until he met the people who brought him here. The investigator confirmed that the murder weapon was on his person. He confirmed its presence. He even had the blade while getting a tattoo that morning. Yes, it was concealed, deep within his pocket. It remained hidden when authorities arrived to take him in. He only relinquished it when entering the patrol car. Officers disarmed him at that exact moment. After fleeing with his companion, he drove aimlessly through various streets. Ryan attempted to flee in his mother's stolen car until stopping to rest. Inside, police found suitcases and several weeks of food. It was a blueprint for evasion, a desperate attempt to outrun justice. Asked for any final statements, he had one last thing. He described a volatile domestic history, a cycle of resentment that never broke. He felt a sense of mutual loathing at home. This toxicity had festered since he was 18. He spoke of the heavy burden he carried. Investigators noted that despite the friction, no physical record existed. The tension sat on a knife's edge, only turning physical in 2020. Prior to that, it was a war of words. Acknowledged. He clarified this was his first actual step into violence. Aside from the previous day, their history lacked any physical combat. He maintained that the violence was never his objective. He simply wanted to sleep as if nothing had happened. If he was truly defending himself, why then did he pack a survival kit and prepare for flight? He admitted planning to vanish into the woods before changing his mind. Ryan was initially deemed mentally unfit for trial. In May 2025, he received life sentences for killing Renee and David. The community continues to heal from a tragedy that shattered countless lives. Thank you for watching. Please explore our other cases for more. Access the most unsettling archives documented here, or examine the latest evidence in this recent investigative file. A home is supposed to be a sanctuary, a place where the world's noise fades into the warmth of family. But the tragedy of the TR family serves as a haunting reminder of how quickly that sanctuary can crumble when silence replaces connection and digital shadows eclipse reality. Ryan's descent wasn't just about a video game. It was a devastating intersection of untreated mental struggle and profound isolation. When we retreat into virtual worlds to escape the friction of real life, we risk losing our grip on the very humanity that binds us. Violence is never a twisted mercy or a solution. It is a permanent game over with no restart button. It leaves behind a void that no amount of digital distraction can ever fill. This story pleads with us to look up from our screens, to speak before we reach a breaking point, to choose empathy over ego. Let us remember that behind every closed door, a little more kindness and a lot more conversation could be the only thing standing between a peaceful home and a heartbreaking archive of what-ifs. Cherish the living, for once the light is gone, the silence is deafening.